Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Providence College. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the nearest emergency exit. In the unlikely event of an issue that requires a building evacuation, please follow the directions of college personnel and exit in an orderly manner. Now, please welcome Providence College School of Business Dean Sylvia Maxfield and Development of Western Civilization Program Director, Professor Sandra Keating.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. I am Sylvia Maxfield, and I am very pleased to welcome you tonight. I'm the Dean of the Providence College School of Business.
And I'm Sandra Keating, a member of PC's Theology faculty and Director of the Development of Western Civilization Program. We're very pleased to have you here tonight and so happy to see so many of you. On behalf of the Providence College faculty and its students and alumni, thank you for joining us.
This is our Oscar night routine. So we're going to go back and forth, only we didn't get to wear the
fancy dresses.
The fancy
yeah.
dresses.
Yeah.
Our featured speaker tonight is a business executive, a political leader, and a philanthropist, Carly Fiorina. She's our fourth PCSB Dean Symposium speaker. Our first was political commentator David Gergen. He was followed by Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan. And then after that, you may have been on campus to hear Catholic Relief Services CEO and Notre Dame's Mendoza School of Business Dean, Dr. Carolyn Wu. The Providence College School of Business Dean Symposium is meant to bring to our community, and especially to our students, accomplished business leaders whose careers and comments illustrate the importance of a values-based business education that is deeply and uniquely integrated with the liberal arts. Please welcome our special guest, Carly Fiorina.
This evening, we've asked Ms. Fiorina to do double duty, and so she is also this year's Fiondella Lecture featured speaker. This has been made possible by one of our most loyal and generous alumni, Bob Fiondella of the class of 1964, and his wife, Carolyn. This series draws attention to PC's core academic purpose. We aim to provide an education rooted in the humanities that prepares graduates to accomplish even the most lofty goals, and our speakers bring personal stories that demonstrate the true value of an education in the humanities. Mr. Fiondella himself exemplifies that kind of life story, and I ask him and his family members present tonight to please stand and be recognized. The daughter of a law professor who later became a judge and an abstract painter, Ms. Fiorina has earned a degree in philosophy and medieval history at Stanford University, the launchpad for her remarkable business career. Her life's work, including her philanthropy, portrays a wide range of interests and the kind of deep creativity that comes from having habits of the mind developed through rich life experiences and a great education. Her example and her story of business success built upon a humanities foundation make her a person ideally suited to present tonight's lecture.
And that success story is extraordinary, to say the least. Carly Fiorina began her career as a secretary at a real estate firm, and she moved on to AT&T as a management trainee at the age of 25. In the 1980s, she earned 2 master's degrees in marketing and in management, at the same time developing a career characterized by achievement and meteoric advancement. She went on to hold senior executive positions at Lucent Technologies, an AT&T spin-off company, and played a major role in one of the most successful initial public offerings in history. In 1999, she became the first woman to lead a Fortune 20 company, and that was when she was named CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Building on those experiences, Ms. Fiorina in recent years has devoted her energy and attention to philanthropy and public service. She was an advisor to Senator John McCain's presidential campaign, and then she earned the California GOP Senate nomination herself. And as you probably know, she ran for US president in 2016, carving out an important space on the national stage as a woman of extraordinary capability and achievement.
Her philanthropic leadership is equally impressive. Ms. Fiorina has led initiatives that have created 10 million jobs around the world and distributed more than $8 billion in donated goods to more than 40,000 nonprofits. That kind of service to the least of our brothers and sisters truly reflects the ideals of Providence College. In addition to the Fiondella family and Ms. Fiorina, I would like to acknowledge some other special guests we have this evening. We are joined by several members of the College Board of Trustees, members of the Cabinet, members of the Business Advisory Council, and a number of our faculty colleagues. Please join me in a warm welcome of these special guests.
It's now my pleasure to introduce another person who proves the theory that a humanities undergraduate education allows you to do anything in life. A history major with a doctorate in philosophy who became a Dominican priest, a college president, and actually a leader in the sports industry as well. Please welcome the president of Providence College, Father Brian J. Shanley.
I want to thank Sylvia and Sandra for the introduction. My sports expertise is largely fabricated by my PR people, but I'm delighted to be here tonight and delighted to see so many of you here tonight. This is a night for us to celebrate the humanities of Providence College and the importance of the humanities in education. We stand at a moment in history where there are a lot of people that question the value of the humanities. And at every college and university, there's a certain amount of angst about students who are not majoring in English and history, God forbid, philosophy, theology, and many other disciplines, including the sciences. And there's a sense that people have that the purpose of college is to gather information that you're going to remember and that's going to be useful in business. The fact of the matter is that most students retain very little about what they heard within 10 minutes of coming out of a classroom. It's not about content. It's really about the qualities of mind that you learn when you get a liberal arts education. It's learning how to think is really the purpose of a college education. And the humanities give us that ability to think differently from a lot of other disciplines. It gives us the ability to communicate more effectively, to solve problems, make decisions in a creative sort of way. It gives us empathy and compassion, and it helps us to find meaning in our lives. And the purpose of the humanities is really to live a good human life. Work is part of a meaningful human life, but it's not the most important part of a meaningful human life. And the goal of the humanities is to help us to understand and to carve out in our own lives a narrative of human flourishing, of really becoming all that God made us to be. And tonight we celebrate that the humanities and success in business are not two things that are pitted against each other, but they are two things that go together. And Bob Fiondella, who so graciously endowed this lectureship, embodies that in his own life. And Carly Fiorina, our speaker tonight, she majored in two of the most useless things on the planet, philosophy and medieval studies, the two things that I have spent my life doing, and she turned out pretty well, I think. And so that what we can understand is the possibilities that the humanities open for us about how to live our lives is really rich and important for us this evening. And I want to make a little bit of a segue to a presentation of an Academic Achievement Award. And it is the Fiondella Student Academic Achievement Award, endowed by Bob and his family, and is presented to a student who exemplifies the achievement of combining humanities and business. And we present this award for the second time tonight, and it goes to Emily Kerslis, a junior from Norwell, Massachusetts, who is a double major in accountancy and Spanish. And I'd like to just quote a couple of Emily's professors who I think nominated her for this award to kind of give you a sense of what makes Emily so special. And I quote, "Emily is an exemplar of a student who fulfills the mission and the vision of Providence College. She excels at both the liberal arts and the business disciplines, and does so in an integrated manner. Her knowledge of the humanities enriches her business acumen, and her mastery of business practices likewise makes her a more productive and worldly scholar of the arts and sciences." And this is from Michael Creighton of the accountancy faculty. John Margenot, a Spanish professor, said this, quote, "She is focused, diligent, and serious about her work. This exemplary work ethic, together with her passion for language study, reveals a student committed to excellence. I am confident that she will succeed in achieving her professional goals." Not surprisingly, considered that work ethic and focus, Emily is studying abroad in Spain this semester, but she has sent us a video in which she expresses her thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Kerslis, and I'm a proud member of the Providence College class of 2019. Thank you for attending this special event and supporting the relationship between the humanities and business. When I started at PC, I was undeclared, so I took Spanish composition my first semester, and it was my favorite class. Then when I took my first accounting class, something clicked and I knew I had found a major where I could learn everything I'd ever wanted to know about how business really works. I've loved balancing my business and Spanish classes with the liberal arts core. What I've learned in every class is how interesting life truly is, and at PC, I've gained a new appreciation for the world and a practical understanding of how to live in it. The humanities and business have been complements for me in achieving this awareness because in both areas we study ourselves, just in different ways. I'm especially grateful for the 4 semesters I spent in Honor Civ, and I know I appreciate my time studying abroad in Spain more deeply because of what I learned at PC. Overall, PC has prepared me not only to be a Spanish-speaking accountant, but also a lifelong learner. I would like to thank my family, especially my parents, Philip and Teresa, for giving me the world and for supporting every decision I've made at PC. I would also like to give a special thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Fiondella for their generosity in sponsoring this lecture and this award that I'm so honored to receive. I'm so excited that I still have another year to grow as a student when I'm a senior back with my Friar family. Thank you again to everyone in attendance tonight and to everyone who makes Providence College such an amazing place where the humanities and business can flourish together. God bless and go Friars.
That speaks for itself. So I'd like to invite Emily's parents who are here, Teresa and Philip, to come to the stage to accept the award on her behalf. Congratulations once again to Emily and her family. The title of one of Carly Fiorina's books is Rising to the Challenge, My Leadership Journey. In the context of her life of great accomplishment, that's a most appropriate title. Just imagine the challenges she has faced as a pioneering woman in corporate management and public service. It's difficult to be the first person to do anything, but Ms. Fiorina has answered that call and has risen to those challenges throughout her remarkable life and career. We are delighted to have her here with us tonight, and I invite you now to join me in a warm Providence College welcome for Carly Fiorina.
Thank you so much. Thank you and good evening. Father Shanley, thank you so much. Sylvia, Sandra, thank you for that lovely introduction. And go Friars. You know, when I'm introduced in such a gracious way as I have been this evening, in a way it makes it sound like life is smooth. You know, oh, she started as a secretary and she went on to be a CEO and accomplish all these great things. Life isn't smooth. It's not a straight trajectory for any of us. And life always comes along with very tough challenges and tough choices as well. I started out, as you heard, as a medieval history and philosophy major. Now, don't panic, Father. I will come back and talk about what an important degree that was. But when I graduated in the middle of a deep recession in the 70s with a degree in medieval history and philosophy, what that degree said about me was, frankly, I was unemployable. And so I went off to law school. I would describe myself growing up as a shy, goody two-shoes middle child. I was the parent pleaser. My sister was beautiful and dramatic. My brother was handsome and athletic, and I was kind of unremarkable, unimaginative, and in the middle. And so as a parent pleaser, my dad had told me that he wanted me to go to law school because that's what he loved. He loved the law. He was a professor of law, and so off I went. I discovered very quickly that I hated law school. And so I made what was probably the first really adult decision of my life, the first independent decision of my life, and certainly one of the hardest decisions of my life. I decided that I was going to quit law school. I wasn't a quitter. But I went home one weekend and said to my mom and dad, I quit. Now you can imagine I had the presence of mind to leave before the first exam. But you can imagine the concern of my mother and father. My mother said, what are you going to do? I had not a clue. My father said, I'm very disappointed in you, Carly. Oof. That's what we never want to hear from our parents. And I didn't have a clue what I was going to do, but I knew I had to go to work and get a job. And so I accepted the very first job I was offered, which was to type and file and answer the phones for a little 9-person real estate firm. I didn't think the job was beneath me. Honestly, I was very grateful to have that job. And I wanted to do a good job. And after about 6 months in that job, 2 men who worked there came to my desk and said, you know, we've been watching you, and we think maybe you can do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do? And that was my introduction to business. Many, many, many years later, I would return to Stanford University, which is where I got my undergraduate degree, and give the commencement address. And by then, I had learned the value of my studies there. And in that commencement address, I told the students that the most valuable course I had ever taken, now remember, Stanford University is in the heart of Silicon Valley. You know, bits and bytes are where it's at there. And I surprised them somewhat, I think, because I said the most valuable course I ever took at Stanford University was an Econ 101. It was a graduate course, seminar, in medieval philosophy. Our professor, he was a great professor, but he demanded that we read a major work of medieval philosophy each and every week. And as your president and I were discussing before the lecture, the medievalists were not brief. So, you know, Aquinas, Maimonides, I mean, these were long books. And we had to read one every single week. And at the end of each week, we had to turn in a 2-page paper that summarized what we thought the philosopher was saying. The process that I would use is I would write 20 pages, and then I'd get it down to 10 and 5, and finally I'd get it down to 2. I don't remember that much about Maimonides and Aquinas, a few things, but as your president said, we don't remember the content, but what I do remember is this, and what I told the graduates of that class was the process I learned of taking a lot of information and boiling it down to its essence, learning the difference between what was interesting and what was actually important, what was profound, what was truly unique, what really mattered. That is a process I have learned over and over and over. It's a process I've used over and over and over in my life. And it strikes me that in this day and age, in the age of technology, where each and every one of us are bombarded by stuff all day long, every minute of every day, our devices vibrate with stuff. It is so important to be able to distinguish the relevant from the irrelevant, the true from the false, the important from the superficial. And so having learned that, what I thought I might do today in the 15 or so minutes I have left before we have a conversation up here on stage is to tell you a little bit about the essence of people that I've learned and the essence of leadership as well. Before I do that, though, I'd like to tell you a couple stories, 3 or 4. The first is when I was in Sunday school at 8 years old. My mother was my Sunday school teacher that year. And remember, I didn't feel like a very special child. Everybody seemed smarter and more together than I was. In any event, that morning, my mother was teaching my Sunday school class, and she looked at me and the rest of her class, and she said, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." It stuck with me. It stuck with me because it was a promise from my mother that I had God-given gifts. But it was also a challenge from her that I needed to find them and use them. Now fast forward. I have made it out of the secretarial pool. I've had a business experience. I've gone off and gotten an MBA, and I've landed in AT&T, a gigantic corporation at the time, 1 million employees, and I was at the very bottom. And I must tell you that people had very low expectations of me. There were very few women. I, was not exactly the resume they expected. I wasn't an engineer. I was a medievalist. So low expectations, honestly, and here I am thrown into the middle of corporate America, and everywhere I went, I found problems that had festered. Everybody knew what the problems were, and they just stayed around for a long time. And I started asking people about these festering problems, whether they were big or small, and people always had something interesting to say about those problems. I could tell you an example of one. I had a customer problem. It went on and on. Everybody said, "No, forget about it. We don't know how to solve it." And finally, somebody said to me, "There's this guy, technical expert. His name is Frank. You ought to go see him." So I went to see this guy named Frank. And for the first time, somebody actually listened to me and took my problem seriously and gave me some really interesting suggestions about how to solve the problem. That was 37 years ago. He was actually pretty cute, so I married him. That's my husband, Frank, right in the front row. In any event, in one of my very early jobs, I met a guy named Jim. He was an engineer. After a couple years, I had been asked to manage a small group of engineers. I didn't know anything about engineering. And so I was a little nervous about how to approach this challenge. Jim was an engineer who, in a way, he kind of, I don't know, epitomized what I thought about corporate America at that time. He sat in his cubicle, he came to his desk at the same time every day, left at the same time every day, ate his bag lunch every day, didn't talk to much of anyone. Everybody kind of ignored him, honestly. He didn't kiss up to the big boss. He just did his job. And I sat down at his desk one day and I said, Jim, tell me about your work. Tell me, Jim, about something you think is a problem around here. And he said, well, you know, Carly, I design circuits. That was his job. And each quarter, I send my circuit designs over to a telephone company who supplies us with those circuits. And I noticed that at the end of the month, when the bills come in, the bills don't match the designs. I said, well, what do you think we ought to do about that, Jim? He said, I think we ought to check the bills. I put him in charge of a group to check the bills, and he saved us $300 million in a single year. I could tell you a story of a woman named Deborah I met a couple years later. Deborah was an African-American single mom. Now, I want to tell you, in corporate America, it was tough to be an African-American single mom in those days. It still is. And Deborah was tough. And because she was tough and because she had faced many challenges, a lot of people thought Deborah had kind of an attitude. And they didn't know much what to do with her. But what I saw in Deborah was someone who could smell BS a mile away. And she wasn't afraid to call BS either. And so I put her in charge of some of our most important negotiations. She was a brilliant negotiator because she was never afraid to ask the tough questions, and she was also never afraid to get up and leave the table. Or I could tell you about a woman I met in India just a couple years ago. I had the great privilege to be the chairman of something called Opportunity International, a Christian-based private microfinance organization that loans very small amounts of money to very, very poor people. People aren't poor because they lack God-given gifts, or because they lack ambition, or because they lack the desire to have a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. Very frequently they are poor because they lack opportunity, and most especially they lack any kind of credit. They're literally living hand to mouth. And so microfinance is the process of training people to become entrepreneurs and providing them with small loans to get them started. And I wanted to meet with some of our clients. And so I traveled to the slums of New Delhi. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to the slums of New Delhi, but they're pretty grim places. Mountains of trash and marauding animals and sewage in the streets, and people piled on top of each other. And I had to walk up a ladder, a rickety ladder, to get to a rooftop to sit down with 10 of our clients. And as I walked that ladder, honestly, I steeled myself, because I thought what I was going to see were desperate people, because the circumstances were desperate. And instead, I found people, most of them were women, who were focused and hopeful and determined and proud of what they had accomplished. One woman in particular, I remember, she told me how afraid she had been to come to the training or to take the loan because she came from a very traditional family, and in her part of India, women didn't do this sort of thing. Her husband was very much against it. Her in-laws were very much against it. Her parents were very much against it. But her family was in desperate poverty. And so eventually she screwed up her courage and she took the loan and came to the training. I asked her, well, how does your family feel about this now? She said, oh, they're very happy. They all work for me. What have I learned about people along the way? What I've learned about people is that everybody is gifted by God. In fact, everyone has more potential than they realize. Our gifts are not defined by our circumstances, neither is our potential. Everyone has more potential than they realize. And it's so interesting that so often people's potential is realized in the tough times, not the easy times. People's potential is realized when they have to actually focus on a problem and solve it and make it better, not when everything's going A-okay. But I've also learned that problems fester not because people don't know they're there, but because people are afraid sometimes to challenge the status quo that allows them to remain there. You see, the thing is, for problems to be solved, the status quo always has to be challenged. People who are affected by a problem know how to solve it. Yes, they need a helping hand, they need opportunities, they need someone to listen to them, but people who are impacted by a problem, generally speaking, have a pretty good idea of what would make that problem better, and yet problems fester because the status quo is always very powerful. And so the catalyst always to solve any problem, big or small, is someone or a group of someones who will challenge that status quo. Which brings me to the essence of leadership. I want to say first that I think there's a lot of confusion about what leadership is, and who can blame us for being confused? Because in every institution, we have been disappointed. In every institution, we've been disappointed by people we thought were leaders. When I was that secretary many years ago, I thought that you were a leader if you had a big title, a big office, a big parking space. And most of those people had big egos to go along with all those things. But I got older and wiser, and I learned that there were people with big offices and big titles who were not leading. So leadership is not about the position or the title that you hold. Leadership is also very different than management. Management's important. But a manager is somebody who produces results, maybe even exceptional results, within existing constraints and conditions. A manager accepts the status quo. A leader challenges it. A leader changes constraints and conditions. A leader says the status quo is not sufficient. There is a problem here to be solved. The purpose of leadership is to challenge the status quo. Sadly, the price of leadership is always criticism. The status quo is powerful. Why? Because people have benefited from the status quo. And whatever the system is, even when it has bad results, there are people who have benefited from the system, who have benefited from the status quo. That doesn't make them bad people. It's just human nature. People who have something want to hang on to it, and so often, even a unacceptable status quo seems less frightening to people than the unknown. It might be better, but it might be worse, and so people tend to hang on. And the people who benefited from the status quo want to keep the system going, and so to challenge the status quo means that the leader, the problem solver, will be criticized always. And so I think the fundamental of leadership always comes down to this. Its purpose is to challenge the status quo. The leadership price is criticism, but the payoff is problem solving. And therefore, if that's what leadership really is, then leadership requires a couple really fundamental things which each and every one of us as human beings possess. The first is courage. Courage is required because criticism can be fierce. And particularly in this day and age, criticism can be unbelievably cruel and constant. And so a leader has to have courage to keep going when the going gets tough. And the going always gets tough. It's part of life. A leader also needs character. Character is an old-fashioned word in a lot of places, not here at Providence College, but character is an old-fashioned word. What is character? Character is when you understand that the ends don't justify every means. Character is when you realize that how you do things is as important as what you do. Character is understanding the difference between what you think is right and what you know is wrong. Character is distinguishing between a short-term gain and longer-term progress. Character is required. When the going gets tough and people say, no, you didn't really want us to solve that problem. And when the status quo is challenged, you all know, as college students, you do a lot of work in collaborative groups. Collaboration is vital for problem solving. Every good leader knows that you don't accomplish anything really worthwhile by doing it all by yourself. You can't solve a problem acting alone. Anything worth doing in life really is a team effort, and that requires collaboration. But sometimes I think we forget what collaboration requires as well. And the first thing it requires is humility. What is humility? It's not false modesty. Humility is knowing you don't know it all. Humility is understanding that you don't have all the answers. Humility is accepting maybe you're wrong or maybe you made a mistake. Humility is understanding that every single one of us can fall, but all of us can be redeemed and lifted up as well. Collaboration requires empathy. And empathy is the ability to actually see someone else, to see them, to hear them, to value them as a person who is gifted by God and who has more potential than they realize, and maybe, just maybe, the person you want to collaborate with has potential to help you solve your problem. Humility and empathy are so vital to collaboration because most problem solving requires all of us to work with people that are different than we are. Maybe they look different. Maybe they sound different. Maybe they've had different experiences. Maybe they disagree with us on certain things. And that's especially when humility and empathy are vital to get to collaboration. But without collaboration, there is no problem solving. And so leaders are humble and empathetic in order to collaborate more effectively. Last year I was at and I'll end on this, it is the last but not least essential quality of leadership. I was at a session for mid-career businesswomen, and I was asked, what if I only had one thing to look for? If I were going to hire someone, what would that one thing be? And it's always hard to come down to one. But if I had to pick only one, I look for people who see possibilities. There are kind of two sorts of people in life, and you know both kinds. There are people who walk into a situation and see all the constraints, all the problems they're going to get in their way, the hurdles they'll never get over. These are the kinds of people who say, well, they're never going to let me do that. And somebody already tried that, and that can't get done. And there are people who walk into exactly the same set of circumstances. Maybe that woman on the rooftop in India. Exactly the same set of circumstances. And they think, but we could do this, and we've never tried that. And this problem can be solved, even though it's been festering for a very long time. Those are people who see possibilities. And a leader has to see possibilities in the circumstances all around them, but most importantly, perhaps, in the people all around them. A leader needs courage. A leader must have character. The humility and the empathy to collaborate effectively. They have to see possibilities in the people all around them. And the last thing I've learned about leadership is everyone is capable of it. Leaders are made, not born. And in the end, the people who lead have chosen to do so. Choose to lead. The world will be better for it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I love that. The whole time I was sitting there thinking, I wish our students could hear this every year. All of our freshman students, it was exactly what we like to have them think about as they begin their careers as students. For the next few minutes, we're going to open it up for some questions. You actually answered some of the questions that I had prepared already, so I have some different questions. And one of them in particular, your comment about God-given talents. I'm wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about how studying the humanities can help one to discover one's God-given talents. I think, as you said, oftentimes we think, and especially the students think, well, I don't know how this is going to be useful, but it might be interesting. But I think also there is a possibility of it helping us to discover really who we are. So I was wondering if you had some comments about that.
First, I so agree with Father Shanley's point that learning how to learn is vitally important. But specifically, with regard to the humanities, one of the things that you learn studying philosophy and history is that people are people. Cultures change, values change, habits change, customs change, but people struggle with the same fundamental challenges over and over and over. There is something universal and common about the human condition. And that's the first thing you learn, is that I share a common humanity with other people. That's an important thing to learn to get along in this world. I think the second thing I would say is what I learned studying history and philosophy. This sounds kind of crazy, but I learned that I really love challenge. I love challenge. So I was geeky and crazy enough to, sort of fall in love with Aristotle and Plato before I got into the medievalists, Aquinas, et cetera, and thought, I want to read them in their original language. So I went off and learned classical Greek so that I could read Aristotle and Plato in Greek, just as I was reading some others in Latin. That was important for me to understand that I love to be challenged. So I think we learn a lot about other people studying the humanities. I think we learn how to learn ourselves. And I think when you study history and philosophy and literature, you're put in a position constantly where you say to yourself, how would I handle this? Because there's stories. There's stories about people. And when I hear a story, I think when most of us hear a story, part of us is saying, how would I handle that? How would I have responded differently? And you learn about yourself in that process.
I think along with that, another question you began to kind of address at the end, I was really struck by the theme of courage throughout everything that you said. Do you have any tips on how to keep courage? I think that's one of the things that just on a day-to-day basis, just, how does one confront all of those difficulties? I mean, students right now are trying to find enough courage to get through finals week and to think about what they're going to do after they graduate. But it's a very difficult virtue to practice.
Yes, it is. And I think because it's so difficult, I think that's why it's talked about so often in the Bible or so often in works of philosophy. It's about courage. It's so important. I would say two things. Perspective helps. And practice helps. And let me just give you an example of what I mean. When remember I told you I landed in AT&T, 1 million employees, people had low expectations of me. Well, let me tell you about my very first customer meeting. I was paired up with an older man. He seemed older to me. I now realize he's younger than I am now, but at the time he seemed very old. In any event, I was paired with him because he was getting ready to retire, and we were going to go off and meet customers. I was so excited. It was my first customer meeting. I bought a briefcase for the occasion, and literally, and the day of the meeting, he comes to me and he says, "I'm sorry, Carly, you won't be able to come to the meeting." And I said, "Well, why not?" I was so disappointed. He said, "Well, the customer is always right, but they have a special place they like to go to lunch, and you can't come." I said, "Well, where are you going?" "Oh, we're going to the boardroom." Well, the boardroom was a strip club in Washington, D.C. I was, of course, terrified and mortified. What should I do? What should I do? And I went in the ladies' room, and I was terrified for hours. I'm going to fail. I'm going to get fired. I can't go to the meeting, but I can't go to the strip club. What am I going to do? Perspective. At a certain point, I was fortunate enough to have seen a lot of the world when I was growing up. And at a certain point, as I'm sitting there in the ladies' room in my suit, I thought, for heaven's sakes, I'm not afraid for my life. I'm not afraid for where my next meal is going to come from. I'm sitting in this incredible building. Come on, get a grip, Carly. So perspective is really important. Whatever you think is the end of the world, actually it's not. I had to find perspective when I battled cancer, when we buried our daughter. Perspective. But the second thing I learned is practice. I went to that meeting, and I looked like a fool. I carried my briefcase in. I mean, you can imagine. I had to walk across a stage. Literally. When I got in the taxi cab, the driver said, "Oh, are you the new act?" Because I had my little suit on and my briefcase. My colleagues asked young women to dance on top of the table while I was there. In every case, the young women would say, "Not till the lady leaves," a moment of empathy. But when it was over, we became great colleagues, and because I had worked through my fear, I wasn't quite as afraid to confront the situation next time. Courage is like working out, honestly. The more you do it, the more you can do it. The more you do it, the more you want to do it. Fear can define you, or you can overcome your fear and define yourself. Perspective and practice.
Oh, thank you. I have one last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But is there anything that you can say about how businesses can support the humanities? Oftentimes, I think we think very much about how we can help our humanities students, get into the next step. But is there something we should be thinking about the other direction?
Yes, absolutely. AT&T did this very interesting longitudinal study over a 20-year period. This was quite a while ago, but it was quite a revealing study. And of course, a company like AT&T or Hewlett-Packard or Facebook, Google, they're looking for technical skills. And we have such a lot of emphasis now on science, math, technical skills, all of which are important, but they're not enough. In any event, in this longitudinal study, what they found was the people who were most successful over time may have gotten a business degree or a technical degree at some point, but they started with a humanities degree. And that was across many job titles all across the country, because humanities teaches critical skills. How to think, how to communicate, how to distill something to its essence, what other people might be like. These are absolutely critical to the process of problem solving. And so, just to show you that I put my money where my mouth is, I'm not just saying this because I'm sitting here. When I was at MIT, I wrote my thesis on the subject that business is making a mistake when it looks solely for technical skills, or when it funds solely technical skills. We are making a mistake as Americans when we do away in high school or elementary school with art, music, history, philosophy. When we do away with those things, we are hampering civil society. We are hampering our ability to be good members of our community. On top of everything else, art, music, history, philosophy, those are things that feed the soul and ground each of us and all of us.
Well, thank you very much. So at this point, we have a few minutes. If we could There are microphones that have been set up in the aisles there, about 3/4 of the way down, and we would welcome some questions if people have them. I'd like to open it up first, perhaps to students, if we have any students who would like to ask a question.
And please wave your arms, because it's very bright up
very
here,
bright
and
here.
therefore we can't see you.
Okay, all right.
Yes, I see an arm waving.
Very good.
Hi, Mrs. Fiorina.
Hi.
My name is Charlotte Stanton. I'm a philosophy major and a history minor here at PC. And I was just wondering if you had any tips for young people in the liberal arts. Typically, when I say my major, I get sort of a look, and then the question, oh, so you're going to law school?
Yes, well, I can relate, as you heard.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily what I want to do. So I just was wondering if you had any tips for maybe people in the liberal arts that are interested in entering business, or just not interested in just doing law school.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my advice would be, if you don't want to go to law school, don't go. It's way too hard and takes way too much effort. And I've learned in life, if you don't like something, you're not going to be very good at it. You have to have joy in what you're doing. Honestly, my advice would be this: get a job, any job. It doesn't matter what the job is. I think young people are so concerned now about how do I start? What's the first thing that I get? It's got to be the right thing. I was afraid for that, and then it turned out I couldn't get the right thing, or so I thought. And it turned out to be exactly the right thing. Get a job, any job. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. And when you have that job, do a really good job. And when you do a really good job, you're going to learn a lot about yourself. And you're going to learn a lot about the people around you and how the world works. And when you do a good job, someone's going to take notice. And when they do, opportunity will knock, and then you walk through the door and see where life takes you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So yeah, we'll just go back and forth to either side. So the next one on that side.
Oh wow, that's loud. Sorry. Hi, Ms. Fiorina. Thank you for sharing your inspiring stories with us. My name is Benedict Portugal, and I'm a sophomore marketing major and finance minor at Providence College. In my business ethics class, we talked about corporate social responsibility, and I was really intrigued. So my question for you is, as a leader, who do you consider your key stakeholders in organizations?
So the fortunate thing is, this is the same answer I've been giving for 20 years. It's the same answer I gave when I was a chief executive. Shareholders are important, but they're only one constituency. Employees are really important because they create whatever products and profit and value shareholders are willing to buy. Customers are really important because if customers ain't buying, nothing works. And communities are really important, the communities in which businesses live and work. Because communities can support a business and make it better over time or not. And ultimately, the job of a chief executive is to balance the requirements of all of those constituencies. And sometimes those requirements contradict one another or conflict with one another. Customers want the cheapest price possible sometimes. Investors want the highest stock price possible sometimes. Employees want the most security sometimes. Communities want the most longevity in the employment opportunities. And those demands sometimes have to be balanced. Corporate social responsibility, I think, is kind of a big fancy title. But what I hope companies are finally coming around to is that they cannot be successful unless the communities in which they operate view them as a valued and important part of that community. I will have to say that millennials have pushed companies in this direction. We had a very aggressive program to invest in underprivileged communities. When I was at Hewlett-Packard, we would invest over a 3-year period, not just money, but our employees' time and talent. But millennials are telling businesses all across this country, it matters to us that you are a good citizen and a good member of a community. And because companies want to hire great talent, they're paying attention to that. So I think companies need to be great members of a community, and that means they need to give back and balance the requirements of every community in which they operate, because those requirements are as important as the requirements of shareholders or employees or customers.
Great, thank you.
Next.
Hi, Ms. Fiorina. It may not appear that way, but I'm not currently a student on campus.
Well, since I can't see you, thanks for sharing that, 'cause you could have been.
Well, I was, and I graduated with my degree in humanities 52 years ago. And for 45 years, I've had my own business, a wealth management advisory business. But I'd like you to amplify a bit what you talked about when you discussed courage. And in December of '02, I was with a group of people in La Jolla, California. One member in my group asked Rudy Giuliani to explain the fearlessness of the firefighters. And his response was that if you think they were fearless, you're crazy. He said that they were courageous, and he defined courage as the ability to do what you're supposed to do despite fear. And I've learned from others that there are times where we can clarify the right thing to do, but we also have to pray for courage to do that right thing. Can you develop that a little further and tell us about the spiritual aspect of your life and how it helped you in difficult times?
Well, first, I fully agree with Rudy Giuliani. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward in spite of fear. I will say, as I indicated earlier, that I think the more you practice overcoming your fears, because let's face it, we're all afraid. That's the other thing you find out studying the humanities, everyone's afraid. And sometimes our fears are silly. Sometimes, but they don't feel silly. Why was I afraid of going to a strip club? Because I was afraid I was going to look foolish. I was afraid I was going to be made fun of. Those are pretty superficial, silly fears, but they didn't feel that way. And so many of us don't do something because we're afraid we're going to fall short. We're going to fail. We're going to be made fun of. We're going to be criticized, so better to just sit back. And then there are profound fears. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I'm going to die. When we realized our daughter struggled with addictions, our daughter's going to die. Those are profound fears. And so practice isn't enough. I'm a Christian, and I know that I have never been alone. I know that if we pray for courage and grace when we need it most, courage and grace are available. For people who don't have a spiritual grounding or a faith and they face very traumatic moments in their life, I'm not as brave as they are. And I think there's a reason that courage is such a prevalent theme in the human story, because courage is a requirement for any kind of progress, and courage is always an effort of will, although our faith can help us find it more easily.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I believe we're on this side.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing everything with us. I do have just one part of your speech resonated with me quite well. Was where you were saying the part about, you don't have the big office, you don't have the big title. It's not necessarily tied to what makes you a leader. It reminded me a lot of a quote from Game of Thrones. Anyone who must say, "I am the king," is no true king. However, that's a great attitude for a manager to take, but most people, I realize, are not managers. And if they try to take a leadership role, they might get confronted with the answer of, well, what are you doing? You're not a manager. You don't have this title. You don't have that big office. So maybe what I'm asking is, what would you suggest that sort of person do, where they don't have the big office, they don't have the tools, but they have great ideas, but the powers that be don't seem to want to hear them?
I'm pausing because one of the things that I do now is I'm hoping that I make a difference in strengthening civil society by doing this, but I have built a business called Unlocking Potential, where we work with nonprofits around the country to invest in the human potential that they have, and specifically to teach people leadership. So I will tell you about one recent example of this. We have been doing a lot of work with Easter Seals. We're doing work next week with Catholic Charities. But at Easter Seals, we gathered in a room, everyone from the CEO, he had a title, to the van driver who delivered disabled children to the classroom, to the teacher who worked with those disabled children every day. And we had everybody in between. Many of those people had exactly the same question you did. Well, I don't have a title, I drive the van, what can I do? But here's the thing. If you reorient your mind around what leadership is, it isn't about leadership, position or title, it's about problem solving. It's about problem solving. It's about challenging the status quo to solve festering problems. And to solve those problems, you have to collaborate with the people around you. You have to have the courage to accept the criticism, the character to keep going, and you have to see the possibilities that things can be better. Every single one of us is surrounded by problems. The van driver had problems. The teacher has problems. The client has problems. And there are people that they work with every single day who are impacted by those problems as well. You don't need someone's permission to make a problem better. You don't need somebody's permission to collaborate with someone that you work with. You don't need someone's permission. I never got anybody's permission. But what you do need is to see the possibility that you could actually have an impact and make that problem better. And the one thing that I came to appreciate very, very much about business, and it's not always true in other places, but what I came to appreciate very, very much in business is business in the end cares about results. The reason I rose in the business world, it's not because I had a plan to become a CEO. I never had a plan to become a CEO. I thought I would get fired, actually. It's the reason I never joined the AT&T savings plan, because you needed to stay 5 years, and I didn't think I'd make it. That's a true story. But what I did do was solve problems. And when I solved problems, people paid attention, because people pay attention to results. Don't wait for somebody's permission. There are problems all around you. Find someone who agrees it's a problem and start working with them.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, and I think we have somebody standing right over there. So this will be our last question.
I'm Corey Lord. I'm a freshman and accounting major. I wanted to know what you thought about a liberal arts education and a business education brings out the most in one's courage, character, and perceptiveness, and how that might make someone more hireable over a student with just a plain business degree.
Mm-hmm.
So you want me to take sides, huh?
Of course, yeah.
Or like repeat my whole lecture.
Well, like what's a main thing you think that makes us more hireable over
Well, you know, honestly, you're going to feel like I'm copping out on your question, but I actually think that's up to you. Meaning, I can't sit here and give you a formula and say, because you have an accounting degree and a history degree, you're more valuable 10 years from now or more, you'll have more impact than someone who just has an accounting degree. I don't think that's quite what you're asking. But what I do believe, what I hope I've conveyed, is that critical thinking, perspective, an understanding of how people work, who people are, what's the same about all of us. The ability to distill something to its essence, all things that I learned by studying the humanities, those things are as valuable to a good career, and I would argue to a good life, as the technical skills required to get a technical job and do a technical job. Some people learn those things that I talked about over here in other ways, but humanities is how I happen to learn them. And for that, I'm very grateful. And I think you all, honestly, as you go out into the world and you're afraid about your finals, maintain perspective, maintain perspective. But as you go out into the world, first of all, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to start. But when you start your life as an adult, don't forget the things you've learned here, not the content, not the specifics. Don't forget the things you've learned here about a moral foundation, or the importance of character, or why courage matters. And never, never underestimate your own potential, but do not underestimate the potential of the people all around you either. And last, but hopefully not least, choose to lead, because there's an opportunity to do so every single day. Thank you all so much for having me.
Wow, that was great. You can stay up here. I just want to thank my dear friend Sandra for moderating this part of the program. Thank you to all who asked such great questions. Thanks for everybody who helped plan this event tonight. And I invite you to stay for a reception. Carly is going to sign copies of her memoir, Rising to the Challenge, My Leadership Journey. Thank you very much for being here tonight, for being such a great audience, and have a great evening.
That was fabulous.
That was good.
That was.